I thought I had already survived the worst night of my life, standing alone at my father's burial, while the people who should have protected him whispered that he brought it on himself. That wound never closed. It hardened, then hollowed, then quietly shaped every inch of who I became. But nothing prepared me for the moment I saw an admiral step off a government helicopter, wearing my dead father's ring. The same ring they all insisted was lost at sea. The same ring that vanished the night they told me to stop asking questions. My name is Gianna Porter. And the second that ring caught the light, every lie I'd ever been fed cracked wide open. And I knew. With terrifying clarity, someone didn't just let my father die. Someone made sure I'd never know the truth. The wind off the harbor sliced straight through my coat as I stood at the edge of Fort Hamilton Pier, trying to stay focused while the bass buzzed with the rigid tension that comes whenever high brass is inbound. Lights from the Verrazzano Bridge glinted across the dark water, and for a moment everything felt routine cold, strict, predictable. Then the helicopter touched down, the door swung open, and a 4-star admiral stepped onto the pier, the kind of presence that makes every soldier stiffen on instinct. I watched the way I was trained to, until a glint on his left hand hit my eye, a silver-blue ring. Familiar, impossible, wrong. My breath caught mid-chest. There was no mistaking it, its distinctive scratch looping over the stone. The worn band shaped by years of salt and metal. A ring I knew by memory, not imagination. A ring that wasn't supposed to be here in the living world. I broke formation before I realized I'd moved. The Admiral slowed when he saw me approaching. A flicker crossing his face, shock, recognition. Something weighted with history. My voice strained through my tightening throat. Admiral, that ring! He dismissed his aide with a single motion, eyes never leaving mine. Porter, he whispered, as if the name itself carried danger. Then, quietly but firmly, follow me, now. He led me down a narrow passage beneath the pier, the air colder, heavier with each step. And in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: whatever he was about to reveal would change everything I thought I understood about loss. He walked fast, like a man trying to outrun his own conscience, boots striking the metal deck in clipped echoes that bounced off the narrow passageway. I followed him down a set of grated stairs into a maintenance bay that smelled of engine grease and seawater. The cold air thickened as soon as the steel door slammed shut behind us, the clang echoing like a verdict. A single yellow bulb flickered overhead, washing his face in a worn, tired glow for the first time since he stepped off that helicopter. The authority that usually wrapped around someone of his rank seemed to slip away. He looked older here, cornered by something he'd held too long. He said my full name, slowly, as if each syllable weighed him down. I answered, barely trusting my voice. I waited for him to say something rational, something that would explain away the impossible thing I had seen on his hand. But when I started to ask, he raised a trembling hand and shut his eyes as though bracing for impact. He confirmed what I already knew in my bones. The ring was real, not a replica, not a replacement. The same one that should have been lost forever. The air shifted. I felt it. He felt it. A truth cracking open. When I questioned the official report, his voice broke. He told me plainly, heavily, that the report was false. And he knew that because he was the last person to receive the ring, directly from my father. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I managed to ask when he had seen him, and he met my stare with something like defeat. Not during the explosion, not even close. He had seen my father 36 hours before the boat ever went down. The world rang in my ears. Then he reached into his coat and placed a small object wrapped in dark waterproof tape onto the metal table between us. He didn't step back. He didn't explain. He just said my father insisted that if anything happened to him, this was meant for me. I touched it. Ice cold, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with its size. The truth folded in on itself. The ring wasn't lost. My father wasn't on the boat when it exploded, and the Admiral, a man who had held all this inside, had known these facts for 3 years. I didn't speak the entire drive back to Staten Island. I walked straight into my apartment, shut the door, and sat on the floor with the microSD card held between my fingers like a fragile pulse. When I opened it on my laptop, the screen lit up the dark room in a cold blue glow. My father appeared instantly. His face, weathered and sunburned from years on the water, was tight with a kind of fear I had never seen on him. He said my name, low, almost whispering, as if he wasn't alone. Halfway through his sentence, he jerked his head over his shoulder. Light glinted off metal. Heavy footsteps crossed the deck behind him. Something hit the boat hard enough to jolt the frame. He tried again, warning me not to trust the report, and the recording tore off mid-word. I replayed the last few seconds frame by frame until I saw it a silhouette flickering at the edge of the image. A tall man in a dark coat. No uniform, no insignia. Just a shadow close enough to touch him. Every instinct in me said danger. Outside the corrupted video were more files, 2 sets of GPS coordinates tied to large cargo ships, a list of container IDs, and a single coded phrase, MK Trident, Bajo 9. It clicked then. The same way cold air punches into a bruise, my father hadn't just stumbled into something dangerous. Someone had been hunting him. The video ended with his voice breaking, barely audible. If they find out you know, they'll come for you first. The fear inside me didn't vanish. It crystallized into something sharp, unshakable, a warning, a promise, and a line I couldn't step back from ever again. The cold settled deeper as I stepped into the old repair yard in Queens, the kind of place where metal groans louder than men do. Jonas Reed was hunched over a cluttered desk when I walked in, the lamplight catching gray strands that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him. He froze the moment his eyes met mine, as if something he'd been running from had just walked through his doorway. He said he'd been expecting me, but his voice cracked in a way that betrayed everything he tried to hide. We sat in a cramped office, lined with faded ship photos and curling navigation charts. Dust danced across the sunlight, breaking through the window, drifting between us like unspoken history. I set the microSD on the desk. Jonas stared at it, his fist tightening until his knuckles bleached. When he finally spoke, it came out barely above a whisper. He had seen the contents before. My father had sent him a backup the night he disappeared. For a moment, the room felt too small to hold the weight of those words. I demanded he explain. He drew in a long breath before admitting the truth. He had been paid to look the other way. Not by strangers, but by people who knew exactly what my father was digging into. They warned him to steer clear, to keep my name out of anything that smelled like trouble. I couldn't get a word out, partly from shock and partly because I understood too well what fear can make a person do. Jonas opened a drawer and pulled out a large nautical map sealed in a waterproof sleeve. The edge was marked with a familiar blue ink I recognized instantly. My father always used that shade when he needed something to stand out. He handed it to me. My fingers shook as I traced the red dots scattered along the New York coastline, all leading toward one destination, Red Hook, 57 HL sealed. The container ID matched exactly with the list on microSD. Jonas pointed at the final mark, his hand trembling. He didn't know what was inside, only that my father said the truth behind his death lived within that steel box. When I asked why he didn't go to NCIS, he gave a hollow laugh, saying Halbrecht Marine Logistics had people planted everywhere. He didn't trust anyone. When I stood to leave, he glanced out the window with a look that made my skin crawl. A black SUV sat at the far end of the lot, unmoving, windows too dark to see through. He said it had been there for 2 days, watching. A chill snaked down my spine. My father hadn't just handed me clues, he had prepared me to pick up where he was forced to stop. Jonas pressed the map into my hands and warned me not to trust anyone in uniform unless I knew exactly who they served. I stepped back into the biting wind with the map whipping against my side, feeling like the world had narrowed to a thin line between what I knew and what might kill me next. Red Hook at 1 in the morning felt like a different planet. Fog clung low over rows of towering cargo containers, the air thick with diesel and metal. The cranes stood motionless, like skeletal giants waiting for something to rise from the dark. I walked the rows, counting IDs until my flashlight hit the number that stopped my breath, 57 HL. My father's mark, My father's last trail. I reached for the lock, but footsteps scraped across concrete behind me. I spun just in time to dodge the first hit, but the second sent me crashing sideways into a frozen wall of steel. Two masked men closed in, one wielding a metal bar. Instinct took over. Training surged up my spine like electricity. I fought hard, but 2 against 1 in the dark gave them the advantage. One forced my arm down, while the other leaned close enough for me to feel the heat of his breath as he hissed a name only family ever used. Skipper Blue's daughter dies like he did. My blood iced. No one outside our circle knew that name. These weren't random thugs. These were men tied to the same chain that wrapped around my father's throat. I twisted free, kicked hard, and broke for the container. The lock gave way under my weight. The door slamming open. My flashlight cut through the dark, revealing crates of unregistered military-grade weapons, stripped radar components, and scrambled tracking units, all carrying the faded scorch of Navy equipment illegally scrubbed clean. My chest constricted. My father had uncovered something massive, something lethal. A red laser dot appeared on the steel beside me. A mechanical hum followed. Wind whipped around me as a military drone descended from above, its spotlight sweeping across the attackers. They scattered instantly. The drone dipped low, enough for me to see the identification markings unmistakably tied to the Admiral. A distorted voice boomed from its speaker, urgent and commanding move. Follow! I ran, the machine guiding me out of the maze, as if hauling me back from the edge of the same fate that claimed my father. And as Red Hook shrank behind me in the dark, one truth rang clearer than the pounding in my chest. I was no longer chasing answers. I was now being hunted by the same men who silenced him. The following morning, I rode the elevator to the 28th floor of the Manhattan Command Building, the metal walls closing in around the thrum of my pulse. His office stretched wide over the Hudson, pristine and hollow in a way that made my skin prickle. But the man inside looked nothing like the spotless reputation attached to his rank. He stood rigid at the window, one hand buried in his coat pocket, clenching the ring he once confessed didn't belong to him. When he finally faced me, exhaustion shadowed his eyes. He told me he had tracked my movements at Red Hook and knew exactly how close I had been to disappearing the same way my father had. Then he set a gray folder on the table. Inside were the names of officers who had approved Halbrecht Marine shipments under the table. My breath caught when I reached the last one, my own commanding officer. He said Carr had already questioned why my name appeared in the Red Hook incident file. His warning landed heavy. The information I carried was enough to get me erased. He opened a drawer and pushed a sealed envelope toward me. Inside was a scanned note written in my father's unmistakable blue ink, urging the Admiral not to let me trust anyone in my chain of command. The floor seemed to tilt under me. I asked why he had never brought this forward. Guilt pulled at his features as he admitted he had broken a promise made to my father just before he vanished. Then he revealed the truth. He'd avoided the final approval on Halbrecht's finances didn't come from the officers listed. It belonged to his superior, Vice Admiral Klaus Harrington. The betrayal settled into the room like smoke. He confessed he had known Harrington was involved from the moment my father handed him the ring and the name of the man who would have him silenced. Fear had kept him quiet, but loyalty misgiven had done the deeper damage. He stepped closer, voice steadier. Harrington knew I was digging. Harrington would not allow me to walk away. I told him I didn't need the warning. I understood the cost already. We had only one path forward. He nodded once. We would take Harrington down from inside the institution that had protected him. I stepped back into the Manhattan daylight with that resolve burning beneath my ribs. The Hudson glimmered beside me. Traffic hissed by, and yet something in the air felt wrong. The black SUV from Queens now sat across the street. Engine off, windows dark. I slipped into a side alley, letting the city crowd swallow my outline. The SUV didn't move. My phone buzzed a number I didn't know. The message was blunt: do not return to base. A second one followed. Carr had ordered my detention for an internal interrogation. The reality of my father's warning hit like a physical blow. I moved quickly, pivoting away from Fort Hamilton. On instinct, I called Maeve Doyle at NCIS. Her voice tightened as she told me something was wrong. My father's entire personnel file had been wiped clean. Assignments, promotions, evaluations gone, erased as if he had never served. Only someone at Harrington's level could authorize that kind of purge. She told me to meet her immediately, but I froze when I spotted movement across the street. Carr stood under a street lamp speaking with a tall man in a dark coat. The same silhouette burned into the final seconds of the video my father left behind. Carr handed him an envelope. The man's sleeve shifted just enough for me to see the Halbrecht Marine Logistics emblem. Carr scanned the street. His eyes swept over the alley where I hid slow, deliberate. He nodded to the man beside him. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The man stepped off the curb with intent. I didn't wait. I ran, slipping into the subway stairwell, letting the throng of commuters erase me in their movement. My heart pounded not from panic, but from clarity. Every step I took from here on out would push me closer to the same danger that swallowed my father. But I wasn't turning back. I texted Maeve one line. I'm going to MK Trident 09, alone. Because the truth waited there and I wasn't dying until I pulled it into the light. MK Trident 09 sat at the edge of a quiet federal complex, the night pressing down like a held breath. Maeve had secured my access but warned she couldn't accompany me. Whatever I found inside, I'd have to face alone. When the triple-locked steel door groaned open, a wave of cold swept over me, sharp enough to turn each exhale into pale mist. Rows of archive crates and sealed evidence units stretched into the distance under harsh white LED lights. I followed the Trident markers until I reached a metal vault the size of a half-coffin, stamped with the exact code my father left behind. My hands shook as I entered the passkey. The vault clicked open. Inside, a black hard drive held the ship tracking logs. I pulled up the data Halbrecht vessels, docking illegally 19 times in 3 months, each clearance signed by Carr. My jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. The next file was audio. My father's voice filled the chamber, steady but strained, naming Carr as complicit and Harrington as the architect. The final video showed him confronting a man in a dark coat, refusing to be silenced. The recording ended in chaos. Behind me, the vault door opened. Carr stepped inside, gun concealed beneath his jacket, eyes cold with intent. I braced myself until light flooded in, and the Admiral moved between us, calling in NCIS as Maeve and her team stormed through the side entrance. Carr went down fast. My knees wavered, not from fear, but from the overwhelming clarity that at last, finally, my father's killers had nowhere left to run. The Admiral turned to me, breath unsteady. Gianna, now we have everything. 1 week later, I stood inside the Naval Command hearing room in D.C., the white lights reflecting off polished seals and rigid flags. Every seat was filled NCIS, JAG, DOJ. Senior officers and audience gathered to witness the truth finally dragged into daylight. The Admiral stood beside me. Maeve held the hard drive and the vault footage like they were weapons. Across the room, Harrington sat with a calm so rehearsed it bordered on arrogance, as if the hearing were a formality before his next promotion. The proceedings began, one by one. Evidence lit the screen: illegal Halbrecht docking logs, Carr's signed clearances, the video of my father's confrontation, the audio naming Harrington, the Red Hook weapons cache, the SUV surveillance tied to Halbrecht. The room grew so still it felt airless. When they called me forward, I spoke clearly about the map, the container, the threats, the falsified report that had convinced me my father died in an accident. No tremor touched my voice. Then Maeve delivered the final strike, my father's recorded warning. The impact rippled through the room. Carr was hauled out in cuffs. DOJ issued Harrington's arrest warrant. He turned toward me, the first crack of fear breaking his expression. The Admiral rose, voice weighted with betrayal. You killed my closest friend. As they led Harrington away, relief didn't come, only the ache of everything my father never got to see. I returned to the Maine coast at the end of the month, to the stretch of rock and salt air where my father once taught me how to tie knots and read the tide by instinct alone. The wind hit hard off the Atlantic, carrying the same sharp scent he used to say held secrets for anyone patient enough to listen. The Admiral had handed me the ring before the hearing, and now it rested on a chain in my palm, heavier than anything I had carried these past 3 years. I knelt at the edge of the rocks and opened the small urn my grandmother had kept for me, A handful of ash lifted into the wind and drifted over the water. I whispered the words I had waited too long to say. I found it all. Dad. I didn't stop. I didn't let them bury you twice. A wave crashed below. A lone gull cried overhead. I slipped the chain around my neck. The ring settled against my heartbeat. For the first time in years, warmth cracked through the cold inside me. I rose, turning my back to the waves. The truth never sinks. Dad, you only have to be brave enough to dive for it.